Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees. Well, it's late July, folks. From a leasing standpoint, it seems to be the busiest July that we've seen in really a long time. As many predicted, the slowdown that we saw back in March and April due to the pandemic has resulted in a late leasing season. However, nationally, the off-campus industry is trending on average somewhere between 2 to 4% year over year with leasing. Obviously, some markets are worse and some are actually trending ahead of last year because, maybe the universities made decisions to de-densify their own campus beds. A lot of things actually go into that. And there's still just a lot that we will just have to wait and see as it relates to vacancy and, of course, with university enrollment as well. Given all of that, the chances are that most off-campus properties are going to be dealing with a little more vacancy than what they have in the past. Maybe we can fill them in January for the start of spring semester, but who really knows? So I wanted to revisit a topic in this episode that I actually reported on last summer regarding how to take completely vacant units and put them on the short-term rental market with popular apps like Air BnB and those type of things. The result from that report was that student housing managers should not try and do this on their own for a multitude of reasons. And we identified some companies that offered this as a service to apartment managers. One of those companies is Vector Travel, and they really impressed me with what they were already doing for their student housing clients and how much they really understood the complexity of mixing a student demographic with a transient business practice. After that conversation, I actually ended up having Vector take over a few vacant units for a client that I provide asset management services for. And let me tell you, I've been really impressed. From everything regarding their technology that they use to the cleaning vendors that they've selected, it's been fantastic. And best of all, it has required very little attention from the property staff, which, as you can imagine, that has been really key during a pandemic because they're worrying about other things. So I wanted to invite Vector CEO Mickey Kropf back to the podcast to see how business was going for them and to see if maybe we could work out a deal for our audience members who may want to turn their vacancies this fall into some short-term rental income. Here's my conversation with Mickey. Mickey, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Well, man, it's been a joy working with you through this past year, both as a client of Vector Stays, because I've got some clients of mine on the consulting side that have used you, and we've been just really impressed with everything that you've been able to do for those properties. And then, on top of that, you guys have been an annual sponsor this year, and that has just been true joy working with you guys, especially in all of these unprecedented times that we're dealing with. And one, I want to just give my appreciation to you guys for being a sponsor of what we're doing at Student Housing Insight. And yeah, on top of that, it's been crazy seeing you guys grow this past year.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we've certainly enjoyed being involved in everything, and I feel like we've been able to meet a lot of vendors and clients and potential clients, through your organization. We've also just learned a lot. I mean, all kinds of different types of information, data sources, but then trends and really even just history. So it's been a fruitful relationship, and yeah, it's been an interesting last 6 months to say the least. But here we still are, and happy to discuss short-term rentals in the student housing sector with you today.
So for those of the audience that may not have listened to our podcast last summer with Mickey and Vector Travel, go back and read that. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But really, before I want to ask you kind of how things have been since March, but for our audience members who may not understand short-term stays, talk a little bit about what it's based on, what it is that you guys provide, and then we'll get into how life has been since the pandemic.
Yeah. So we see ourselves as a multifamily hospitality company. We're essentially a partner to various multifamily companies, including student housing providers. We generally function to activate the vacant units in a property. And we do that through furnishing and then photographing and distributing online on various online travel channels and corporate GDSs. And so we really kind of manage soup to nuts this hospitality experience. So stays of one night, previously up to 30 nights, but now we've extended that as part of our response to the pandemic, but up to 90 nights. So short and midterm stays where we really handle everything with that, including the housekeeping, the accounting, reporting, compliance, and so forth.
And you used an abbreviation, GDS. What does that mean?
Global distribution system. So just thinking back on like traditional corporate travel stays where travel managers are booking, we make sure that we have exposure to those as well.
So really, to even break it down on a more simple basis, you take the vacancy that multifamily properties, apartment communities, and student housing, the vacancies that they have of their completely vacant units, and turn that into a vacancy loss to maybe recouping even more than their gross potential rent, based on putting it on things like Air BnB and other short-term rental platforms, as well as your own platform as well, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we do as much distribution as we can. We like direct bookings, of course, just to save on platform fees, and we're also able to kind of generate some loyalty and have some good repeat customers coming back to properties. Also, friends and family of residents are typically given coupon codes, and kind of enables us to position these things as amenities, not just a kind of business solution to a vacancy loss problem. It can also be a residential experiential opportunity.
And kind of my own personal story with that, or journey with that, several years ago, I was trying to do the same thing. I was looking at our vacancy across our portfolio and said, hey, we could take some of this and offload it and list it on Airbnb. And I got to tell you, it was just a headache, and the managers hated it because it was putting so much extra work on them and taking them away from, student housing is now, it's a 10-month pre-leasing cycle every year. As soon as you get them moved in and settled, you're starting to pre-lease for the next year. And student housing is management intensive in and of itself, and short-term rental stays are intensive as well. So, I could just tell you, I pretty much kind of gave up on doing that. And then when I found you guys and working with you guys for the past year, it's just been incredible. I mean, you guys have really just eliminated so much of that headache and have really, turn those vacancies into something that, really working out for us. And, I've even talked to some landlords who are doing this as well, that, they intentionally want to keep a 5 to 7% vacancy because they're making so much on the short-term rental stays. So
that's interesting to hear. And I mean, kind of backing up, I mean, part of our thesis beginning this business in early 2018 was just that from the consumer side, they wanted to stay in apartments. They wanted more authentic experiences, different types of locations as opposed to hotels. And the data has kind of borne that out with the percentage of total lodging stays increasing over time, more and more short-term rental stays. But then we also just saw it as an industry solution that wasn't yet in place. Nobody was going all the way in terms of full service management to activate the vacancy in a lease up or a stabilized asset. And then part of the reason we gravitated to student housing, and I think it was such a natural fit, was that annual lease up cycle that occurs, and the fact that market conditions can change year to year. Even if the on-site team is doing a great job leasing, there may have been 2 new buildings that cropped up next door, and that's going to make it difficult to hit that whatever the target is, 99, 100%. And so we can go in pretty nimbly, activate those spaces, and then, give the units back when the primary function, is needed again, student housing residents.
Yeah. Well, and the landlords I'm talking about specifically who are building that in, these aren't your national operators, although, I think a national operator that can figure this out is going to do really well. But these are kind of the mom and pop, they manage and or own, somewhere between 500 to, 3,000 beds in a market. And, they're typically in, tier 1 schools, with medical schools, near the campus, and of course, Power 5 football conferences, that type of thing. And it's really turned. A lot of them have said if the bank would be okay with me, building in 10 or 15% vacancy, I would do it. So
yeah, well, that's interesting to hear, and I think the perception has always been in the past that short-term rentals were riskier, and maybe that is true in some ways. But if you looked at that example and you said, wait a second, 5 to 10% of the units were allocated towards this other use, it's actually a bit of a diversification play. And then those units are already in place, the operation is already in place, and could be flexed up and down based on needs. And so, and then you bring up lenders. I think that's the last piece that still really has to get there. I think we've seen signals about short-term rental income, including variable short-term rental income, which is essentially what we provide, given a revenue share model. We're starting to see that recognized by more and more lenders. And, I could tell a quick story of student housing property in Austin that we managed in 2019. We provided, after fees and expenses, about $300K plus in NOI for that year. And if you were able to cap that, at whatever the prevailing rates were at the time, it's probably somewhere in the ballpark of $4 to $6 million in value that was added through the program. Yeah. And that was the unit count varied over time, but it was never more than 10%.
And you would have done it in 2020 again in Austin if it wasn't for the fact that COVID had to cancel South by Southwest.
Well, actually, in that case, we lost those units to somebody doing a master lease. So, a little more certainty was provided. Couldn't really argue with that, despite the performance. But that is true. That kind of leads us to the subject of the day. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of the perfect bridge to the, kind of my next question of, how has the short-term rental business, how has it been operating during this pandemic? Again, a personal story here. When all this happened, and you and I even had some conversations of, oh gosh, this is going to devastate you guys. And honestly, because I'm seeing it from a P&L standpoint, starting in April, it was actually really, really good. So I don't know if that was an anomaly, just based off of the business that we've been doing together, or if that was something that you're seeing across the market. So what's been happening with short-term rentals since March?
Yeah. So the day that South by Southwest was canceled kind of marked it for us. Of course, we saw the news out of China and Italy. Of course, we thought, okay, this could have some negative impacts on our business here and the industry in general. I'd be lying if I said that we really understood what the potential effects would be until we saw South by Southwest canceled. And it wasn't so much around, the impact on those particular clients' units that we operate in that market, though that's somewhat devastating. That's the best month typically for Austin in terms of short-term rentals and hotels. It was more that it felt like the first domino here in the States to fall, and that turned out to be the case. And so, March was just generally bolstered by the fact that was middle of the month, and then that's positive seasonality helping anyway. The property that you're referring to is a little bit of an anomaly in that April was still better than March. That's generally the case just with seasonality, but with COVID hitting, we kind of experienced a period there, this rapid decline where cancellations were up 7 to 10x in different markets. They were outpacing new booking confirmations, which is I mean, we've never seen that before. And so the bottom was falling and we didn't know where the bottom was. Thankfully, in hindsight, it turned out that across our portfolio, April was really only down about 40%. And you contrast that with the performance of hotels, even though most of them got to stay open, some of them were down 80, 90%. You read about Marriott, you read about the effects on Hilton in different markets. And those were the impacts they saw. And then May, it just surged back. And I think that corresponded with the reopening, signaled by governors and mayors across different municipalities. It was also, I think, just a function of people wanting to travel. We're all accustomed to kind of summer road trips or summer vacations, and we'd all been cooped up since, maybe March. And we saw that demand shifted. We made some changes. We opened up stays to more than 30 days in that period, because we saw some demand for that midterm stay up to 90 days. And that certainly helped pull us out, and I think helped us perform better than hotels as a result. And then June just continued the trend, and July is already up 30 to 40% over June, which again, some normal seasonality there. No, we don't know what's to come in terms of government interventions around this, but consumer demand is there, and I don't think that's going back in the bottle.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the college town markets that you're in. I hate to kind of ask what you're seeing year over year, because I know you've had so much growth that, looking at a kind of a same story, year over year growth is kind of hard for you to even do. But, just I guess kind of more in your own opinion, how are you feeling about the college markets, and, what have you been experiencing during this pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, in June and July, year over year is pretty similar, and in some instances even better in 2020, which is really interesting to see. April was down. Any of those markets where we already operated the same unit count, that was objectively down, but things have trended back up in the same way since May, and I think when we pull back and we try to analyze what's going on in these different markets, generally the tier one school markets, if they didn't have a prohibition on short-term rental stays, have fared a little bit better than tier two and tier three markets. Mm-hmm. And it's just been kind of about what the demand drivers are. But we have seen generally a shift toward, more midterm stays. We've seen drive market consumption that's increased as opposed to, fly markets, and we just happen to be positioned in a lot of drive markets. But, road trip activity, weekend getaways, those things are all still there. And then these longer term corporate stays are really kind of help driving it.
Gotcha. Anything specific with, that you're seeing as it relates to, I'm thinking in a lot of these towns with either medical schools or, even a more urban market or metropolitan market where you've got, doctors and nurses that don't want to go home and, expose their family or anything, and kind of want to self-quarantine. Are you seeing a lot of, and I'm sure you have no way of actually tracking that. It's not like you can ask people, are they quarantining? But are you seeing anything related to that?
Yes, we are. So no, we don't have good data on it, but we do have anecdotes, and it's amazing. Just some simple prompts about business or pleasure, and then open-ended questions about purpose of stay have yielded some of those responses that you're getting at. And yeah, we have seen medical students and other healthcare workers consuming our type of lodging. So some of it has been running towards the crisis. So locum tenens, healthcare providers moving around, and we kind of, positioned our inventory to supply that need. And then some of it has just been that local case, that person saying, okay, I'm in the ER every day with this, and I've got somebody at risk at home. Let me just go ahead and rent a place for the next few months. And thankfully we've been able to accommodate most of those people. And there isn't, even though we're in multifamily settings, the way we do things there's very little interaction for our guests and these kind of midterm stay residents. They're generally using codes to enter a building. They're going straight to their places, oftentimes keyless entry to get into their units, and so they're not having to interact with people. And even though it's a multifamily setting, it's a pretty safe setup.
Yeah, completely touchless. So, nationally, the purpose-built student housing industry is running about 2 to 4% behind year-over-year pre-leasing numbers for the fall. And that's been pretty consistent, especially from May forward. I think the past couple of weeks, I've heard of a lot of markets that are just going gangbusters right now, and signing 30 leases a day and things like that. So that may be, that margin may be getting even closer. But then there's also some schools that have kind of reverse track on on their opening plans, and have made announcements that they're going to go back to just virtual to begin the semester with. Now, I've got some interesting theories on how that's going to shake out for, especially right now, how that's going to shake out for the student housing industry, because I think as some of those universities are making that announcement, I think there's going to be actually more students saying, okay, well, let me find something off campus because I don't want to live with mom and dad.
Right.
So that may actually help the off-campus occupancy. But regardless, I think we're going to see in a lot of markets, we're going to see some vacancy that's going to be attributed to, call it summer melt or, COVID fear or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And this is going to leave, many properties with more vacant bed spaces than what they've dealt with in the past. And let me remind everyone out there that, there are multiple reasons you want to consolidate your beds into completely vacant units. But obviously, one of those reasons is the ability to offer them as a short-term rental through companies like Vector. I've seen this where, a 500-bed property has 5% vacancy, so that's about 25 beds. And instead of having a lot of empty beds scattered, they may be able to have 5 to 10 completely vacant apartments. And instead of mothballing them, you can place them on Vector's platform and sometimes get income greater than your market rent, as I mentioned earlier, because you're renting out nightly or weekly, or even as you said, up to 90 days. Mickey, once a manager has been able to consolidate and come up with completely vacant apartments, go through the process of what they do to put those units on Vector's platform.
Yeah, I mean, we work to make it pretty simple. So there's invariably a little bit of work that has to get done just to get the new client comfortable with the contract arrangement, and then just the general operation. How are we doing on guest screening? What's our insurance coverage? All of that sort of stuff. But that can all get worked through in couple of days if they're engaged. And then, I mean, it's really call it 7 to 10 days, and we can activate those 10 units and have them thrown off cash. So we work pretty hard to make that happen quickly. We just have a pretty fast paced as an early stage company, and we're client driven. And so we realize the longer those things sit vacant, the bigger the hit to the client.
And as someone who has gone through it, I will tell you the biggest hiccup is going to be insurance, because, regardless if you're a private owner and working with, one of the big national operators, because a lot of clients or a lot of owners are doing that because of a lot of advantages with insurance rates, and because they're able to bundle everything, into one policy. And I will tell you that was the biggest thing and we lost money on it, because there were home football games that we completely missed last season because we were working with the insurance companies to get the thumbs up on everything. And I will say, regardless if I would encourage people, if you know that you're going to do this, engage with your insurance company right now and say, hey, this is what we're looking to do. What do you need in place? And because that's going to be the one thing that's going to take the longest.
Yeah. And, that said, most of the time, I think the insurance by the real estate company is ample, and then they just need to get comfortable with what we have. And, we've past, I think all along the way. And when we haven't, we've just purchased additional coverage. And so, it's generally commercial and general liability coverage, workers' comp, and maybe some excess liability coverage that we have.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the furnished process, right? Because most student housing communities, typically, especially those that are purpose built, purpose designed, typically are going to have a base furniture package. So that eliminates a lot of the capital infusion they have to do to get on the Vector's platform. But there's other things like the coffee makers, the ironing boards, the the eating utensils, and all of those things that can add up pretty quick. When you start talking about even putting 3 or 4 units onto the platform. Talk a little bit about how these units are outfitted, and what does that typically cost, and are there options for renting furniture if the unit is not already furnished?
Yeah, and we have a few different packages, a few different solutions based on client preferences and the existing status of the units. When a unit is furnished for student housing, you're generally looking at kind of what you said, the decor, the housewares, linens, and call that if it's a 1-bedroom, kind of in the $1,000 range, 2-bedroom, $1,500 range, and so forth. Step that up a few $100 each bedroom. And then if it's a completely unfurnished unit, which may be more rare, we generally furnish a 1-bedroom at including hard and soft costs about $5,000, and then a 2-bedroom, a little bit north of $6,000. We are agnostic on how it gets done. It's a function that we provide because it's a means to an end for us. Most of our clients have vacant inventory, and so we have to figure that out for them. And then there's the rental option. And so we have a few different rental partnerships. And you can literally rent everything. You can rent those forks. You can rent the fake plant in the corner. It's not going to be the most cost-effective solution, but if the term is really in question, the duration of time committing to this, then that can be a good way forward. And it can basically just be, an off-the-top expense. But if it's an entire unit being furnished, it's generally in the $400 to $500 range per month on rental of a 1-bedroom, and then again stepping it up similarly, $500 to $600 on a 2, and so forth.
Gotcha. Well, hey, listen, if I haven't said it enough, I really love Vector, what you guys are doing. But you guys are not the only ones doing this. Expedia has the acquisition of Apartment Jet, who, to me, I think we're probably, that's when I first kind of learned that there was a company doing this, that was handling this, was with Apartment Jet. They acquired them, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and kind of expanded this part of Expedia. But they just made some announcements that they are shelving this category completely, and I guess basically just shutting it down. I know many of the property management companies that were using them, and a few student housing operators as well. You mentioned that you have many of their clients jumping over to you guys. If there is someone listening in the audience who currently has properties that were on Expedia or Apartment Jet, and they're have been one of their clients, and they're saying, "Hey, I would really like to move this over to Vector." What's really involved with that?
Well, yeah, and let me also mention, it's not only Expedia Multifamily that has shut down those programs, so the Apartment Jet program and Pillow. There are also some other independent businesses that focused on multifamily in general, but surely also had some student housing leases in place that have gone under in this thing. So we've always run kind of this lean operation, and it's revenue share, so our commitments weren't there on the lease front, but other companies weren't so fortunate with their model, or maybe with their fundraising cycle. And so, Lyric and Stay Alfred were two of the trailblazers on the multifamily short-term rental front, and they've gone under as well. And so there may be empty units that were previously leased that are they're furnished. So those could be activated pretty quickly and easily as well. But in any one of those scenarios, I think the Expedia multifamily portfolio is being wound down at the end of this month, as I understand it. And so those can be really quick and easy transitions into the Vector program. And furthermore, I believe we offer a little bit more service on the ground. So in terms of, managing access and managing all of the housekeeping, we really don't ask much of anything of the on-site teams, only when there are maintenance items and we work through the
Right.
ticketing system. But yeah, call it a matter of days just to transition into us.
So, I think one thing that we haven't really discussed in all of this are those different, types of models as far as revenue share versus, a master lease type of situation. We went into that really well with our first interview with you. So for folks who want to understand kind of the differences with that, they can go back and listen to that. But you guys have a revenue share model. Talk to us a little bit about, what those fees look like, what that split looks like, so folks have a little bit of understanding of how that's done.
Yeah, we started this knowing that there was nobody out there focused on a revenue share model in the multifamily sector, and that, ideologically it sort of made sense to us that the client should have the majority of the upside, and that we could provide the service and take less risk, frankly, than the lease arbitrage model or the corporate master lease model. But with our standard arrangement, it's 75% to the client, 25% to us. And with that 25%, it's really a pretty much a fully loaded, kind of a fee. So that's going to cover all of our software, all of our personnel, all travel, all of the housekeeping, all of that sort of stuff. So all of that is baked into it. And so it's fairly clean. And again, we're going to handle everything on behalf of the client. So basically, when they sign a management agreement with us for a set of units, it's almost as if we've leased the units. We've taken control of those things, and they generally don't have to worry about those units or work on them.
Gotcha. Is that before or after the cleaning fees? Because you guys usually collect a cleaning fee from the tenants as well.
Yeah. I said it that way just for simplicity, but we basically collect a cleaning fee and then pay out a cleaning fee. So it's a pass-through expense, but we do actively manage that, and that's kind of within our domain.
Gotcha. Well, one thing that, when I mentioned earlier about missing some football games last year because of the delays that we had with getting insurance approved and everything, and thinking about, that's, you were talking about Austin. Outside of South by Southwest, I know you guys did a lot of business in the fall related to the football games. And, right now everybody's going to try to give it the old college try and have some kind of season. But as we're getting closer and closer to September and seeing things start, it sounds like, the Power Five are certainly going to, make a go at it and at least try to do conference play. We'll see what ends up happening. But, I'm kind of wondering, what's, how do you feel like that as far as your, as a student housing, if I'm a student housing manager and I'm at, an SEC school or a, Pac-10 or ACC or something like that, and, thinking, this would be really great for football season and could see the potential revenue that could come in from it. How do you think that's going to play out for short-term rentals? Because, part of me kind of thinks, if I was traveling to go to a football game at, the school I graduated from or whatever, then I would probably rather be in, a student housing or multifamily property where I've got that touchless entry and, I'm not dealing with a lot of people from all over the country that are, coming into the hotels. But I may be completely wrong about that. So just, wanted to kind of get your feeling on how you think that may end up working out, and, if it's something worth considering.
Yeah. I definitely think it's worth considering. That said, we've continued to push rates up. So as we've seen demand climb, we've been able to drive average daily rate up, and the occupancy rate has continued to rise as well. We will have some normal seasonality trends downward in the fall in general, but around specific events like football games, I mean, it is still a little bit to be determined based on the administrative and government intervention or the potential for it. But we are planning on servicing that, and we intend to remain open, through those events. And I do think, for the reasons you just listed, that we are arguably a better alternative to hotels because of the lack of interactions, the ability to go kind of straight to your unit and stay to yourselves, kind of isolate amongst your group, much better than in a hotel scenario.
Well, great. Well, hey, I appreciate you for again, everything that we've talked about with what you guys are doing with Student Housing Insight and just providing this service to our audience members. But we've all got things we got to get on to. So I think we've probably covered most of the questions that I think that's going to be on everyone's mind. Two things. One, I want to let the audience know of a special that you're doing for anybody listening to this. And then also want to make sure that we give them information on, if they've got additional questions. And I've got a feeling that it may all be you may have an answer to both of those. You got a single answer that's going to answer both of those. But first of all, for the listeners that are listening to this, and I don't know if you've got a time limit on this, but if you're listening to this and you want to put something in place for your community or your portfolio for this fall and going into this next year, you've got a special deal for them, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we'd love to offer the Student Housing Insight listeners and followers the opportunity to get basically 1 month free. So think of it like a rent concession, but a fee concession. So if they'll sign up by the end of August, we'll not charge a management fee for that first month and kind of ease that transition into this program. So yeah, we'd love to offer that. And we did put together a quick landing page if you want to register, maybe have the property underwritten for both the local regulations and the short-term rental income potential. So it's vectorstays.com/SHI. And you can just input your information and the property info, and we will follow up, within 24 hours or so to share all of that info with you.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Mickey, I appreciate it again so much. And thanks for making that offer. getting 100% of that revenue for the first month, I think it makes it a lot easier to make that decision. What, so everybody's clear, what's the kind of minimum terms in order to do that? Yeah.
So for the student housing industry, we've kind of tried to tailor it to their needs. And so think of it as a semester at a time. But, if we had to pick a term length, let's say 6 months at a time. Gotcha.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it. And thanks so much for joining us today. And folks, don't forget, if you've got any vacancy, try to consolidate and get those empty rooms. Even if you don't use Vector, that still provides a lot of flexibility, be it, providing them for, parents to stay in when they come over, or someone to if you end up having an issue with quarantining someone. There's so many useful reasons as to why you want to do that. And hey, Mickey, actually, before you go, I think there's one other thing we probably ought to I was talking about, having a place for parents to stay. That's actually something you're able to provide through your website. You give a link to the property managers to give out to their residents to say, hey, if you've got any friends, if you've got parents, book directly with Vector Stays, and they get a really good rate for that. You want to explain that really quick before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of back to being client driven. So, we think it makes sense, and it sort of pays for itself partially anyway by forcing that off of an OTA with a booking fee, and then to booking direct, where there's basically just a credit card processing fee. But, we let our clients determine it. It's often somewhere between 20 and 30% of a discount. And yeah, and we work with the on-site management team to push that out to residents. If they have an email list of parents, then it can go to them as well. And it's just a really nice option. Generally these properties are are of course quite proximate to campuses and and things to do in the area. And then if their son or daughter is staying 1 or 2 floors away, then that's really convenient. Provides some privacy to the student resident, but also a proximate location for the friends and family to stay in while they're there.
Just another reason to do it. You're making life so much easier for everybody. So I remember having to take all those phone calls of residents or residents' parents saying, "Hey, have you got an empty unit we can use? We'll bring our own bed sheets." And so that's
just to give them a link, right?
Exactly. Well, again, Mickey, thanks for spending the time with us today, and thanks for everything you're doing for our industry, man.
Well, thank you, Wes.
All right, take care.
All right.
All right, guys, you heard them. If you've got some completely vacant units that you want to turn into short-term rental income, go check out vectorstays.com/SHI and find out if this is something that makes sense for your property or your portfolio. It doesn't make sense on every property. I'll go ahead and tell you that. And sometimes the numbers just don't work. But that's part of his questionnaire on that landing page that really will help you figure that out. So again, vectorstays.com/SHI. And in full transparency, as you heard, Vector is a sponsor of Student Housing Insight, and there is one reason we allow them to be a sponsor, because we think they are the best at what they do, and they understand how their service has to be altered for a student housing community. Okay, I guess that was actually 2 reasons, but you get the point. So go check them out and take advantage of getting the first month fee waived. I mean, that's a huge benefit, and it's only available to our audience members who go to that landing page, vectorstays.com/SHI. Guys, thanks so much. Happy turn season to everybody, and we'll chat soon.